To talk about the short-term budget resolution that we'll be voting on within the next couple of days and a quote that the President made this morning. The bipartisan agreement that we're going to tackle on the floor to extend federal budget past the CR deadline through the end of September is salutary. It's salutary because the two houses work together to find an agreement. I can see things in the agreement that I like, and I can see things in the agreement I don't like. That's the nature of budget agreements. My principal disappointment with the agreement is we should have done it in December. And I will actually give credit to my Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We were ready to do this deal in December. The appropriations committees in both houses had met. We were ready to do a deal that would then give everybody in government, but more importantly, all of our citizens and all of our businesses, some certainty about what would happen between that vote in December and the end of the fiscal year, September 30. The incoming administration, not yet in office, dispatched the Vice President and others to the Hill and said, don't do a budget. Don't do the omnibus bill. We want to have the ability to work on it ourselves. And I think this was against the better judgment of both sides in the Senate. A decision was made, okay, we won't do an omnibus bill in December. We recessed on the 10th. We had plenty of time to get work done. Instead, we would do a CR through April 27th. I think my colleagues were right to want to do it in December. Nevertheless, we put everybody through the hoops of, is there going to be a shutdown or what are we going to do? And now apparently we have a deal. We'll discuss it, and I hope we'll vote in favor of it. We could have gotten the same deal in December. We would have given people more certainty. They could have adjusted. We could have not frightened people about a shutdown and done other productive work. Nevertheless, we've gotten a deal that I plan to support. But I was very interested this morning, very interested, and I'll be blunt, very disturbed with the President's words. At 8:07 this morning, he put out a tweet about the deal, about a bipartisan deal reached by two Republican houses, with Democrats included, as we ought to be, because we represent a lot of the American public. And this was the quote: either elect more Republican senators in 2018 or change the rules now to 51%. Our country needs a good shutdown in September to fix this mess. And so what I want to talk about today is whether there is a good shutdown of the government of the United States of America, whether there is such a thing as a good shutdown. And is it right for the President of the United States to hope for a good shutdown of the government of the greatest nation on earth? I can't imagine a CEO, any CEO we would admire, would call for a shutdown of his own company. That's what President Trump now is. He's the commander-in-chief and the chief executive of the government of the greatest nation on earth, and he apparently believes there could be a good shutdown of this government in September. Mr. President, I want to take us back to the fall of 2013. In the fall of 2013, the government was shut down, as you know, for about 13 days in October. It was my first year as a senator. And I'll tell you, that was bad. It was bad in Virginia, a state with 170,000 federal employees who didn't know whether or not there would be work to do, when they would return to work, or whether they would be paid for those days. It was bad for veterans whose claims to get a disability benefit were already too backed up and who couldn't get their calls and questions answered. It was bad for veterans whose requests for medical appointments were already too backed up, and in the uncertainty of a shutdown, they didn't know when they would be resolved. It was in October, which is the high season of tourism in Virginia. It was bad for one of my smallest communities, Accomack County, on the eastern shore of Virginia, that's adjacent to the Chincoteague National Seashore. They count on October tourism as a huge part of their local economy. But when the federal parks shut down, it was bad for their economy. It was bad for economies near the Shenandoah National Park to have that park shut down in the heart of fall leaf season, which is a time they count on to help their small businesses succeed. It was bad for people on military bases when DOD civilians were being furloughed, civilians like nurses at hospitals and child care workers who provide child care to military families on military bases, and they didn't know when there would be reopening. I see nothing good about a shutdown of the government of the United States. And in fact, it was the first Republican president in the address at Gettysburg who said the question that we always have to grapple with is whether government by, of, and for the people shall perish from the earth. And I think the answer to that question is that it should not perish from the earth, not for a year, not for a month, not for a week, not for a day, not for an hour. There should not be a shutdown of the government of the United States. There is no such thing as a good shutdown. So I just wanted to come to the floor today and be very, very blunt. On behalf of anybody in Virginia and in this country who's afraid of how a government shutdown could impact themselves or their communities, on behalf of troops, veterans, military families, and members of our Department of Defense who keep us safe every day, on behalf of veterans who fought for this country and who need the federal government to cut the backlog on disability claims or medical appointments at the VA, on behalf of every senior citizen or disabled person who has a case waiting resolution by Social Security or Medicare or CMS, on behalf of 170,000 federal employees living in Virginia and the people and communities they serve, on behalf of cities and counties around Virginia who rely on federal support for infrastructure projects, economic development assistance, opioid prevention efforts, export promotion, and so many other critical programs, on behalf of Virginians struggling with disease and illness who pray for life-saving cures developed through federally funded medical research, on behalf of our dynamic businesses and all of their workers who need certainty from Washington in order to create jobs and expand the economy, on behalf of Virginia students and families who rely on Head Start programs or rely on federally funded work-study programs so they can work their way through college, on behalf of all Virginians and all Americans who deserve to have clean water, breathable air, beautiful open space, safe food and drugs, violence-free communities, a functional immigration system, and protection from cyber threats, and on behalf of the reputation of this nation and the values that we proudly claim as American values, I will do anything and everything in my power as a United States Senator to stop any Trump shutdown, to stop any good shutdown of the government of the greatest nation on this earth, either now or during September or during the remainder of his term. And I call on all of my colleagues to take a similar pledge. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield the floor.